Good evening. Last month, we began the first in a series of presentations about the electric utilities background. As a reminder, we're having these discussions before our upcoming rate study and early conversations on where we will purchase our energy past 2035. This provides transparency and gives everyone the same knowledge of our operations. During the last presentation, we received 3 questions. The first, how did the utility procure energy prior to the 1960s? The city owned and operated its own power plant, at one point even relying on an old World War I diesel submarine engine to light the streets of Naperville. When the plant burned down, we began receiving energy from ComEd. The second, what was the process for signing the 2007 IMEA contract? A consultant was hired and ultimately recommended that the City of Naperville utilize a joint action agency for its energy and services needs. City staff, as well as outside counsel, negotiated with IMEA and brought the contract to council for signing. Finally, a question was asked about the 2 RFPs that were released. These documents were created in collaboration with Nest and Clean. Proposals are currently being evaluated by staff. Tonight, we'll discuss the many considerations that go into running a utility. The city is a service business, and the utility is a business within that business. We operate with unique requirements and regulations that other departments do not have because we provide a specific commodity, electricity. But like many businesses, we cannot function 100% independently. We rely on our support service partners and other departments like finance, IT, HR, and legal to handle specific issues, including billing. And as the board of directors, we rely on you, the council, to make the decisions that drive our work. Also, because of the unique state and federal regulations in the electric space, we depend on external parties to handle specific responsibilities. In our case, our power provider handles some of these items. This is no different than any other department that depends on contractors to provide services. Our goal is for you to walk away after tonight with a better understanding of who does what resources are necessary, and how many factors are considered when making decisions for the utility. For this discussion, we'll divide what we do into 3 areas: daily operations, administration, and planning. Daily operations, such as line workers in the field and checking to make sure the power is on, are most noticeable to the public, but it also involves behind-the-scenes work, which I'll explain in more detail shortly. Administrative tasks are certainly less visible, but just as important. They involve everything from working with the organization that sells our wholesale power to filing government-required reports and ensuring that work is completed on time and within budget. And finally, planning encompasses much of what you'll see later this year: understanding our system condition, figuring out what rates to charge to cover the cost of running the utility, and thinking well ahead about service levels and long-term contracts. We have 7 different sections that support our daily tasks. Our employees in the field proactively maintain and repair equipment. We have a support staff that implements automated control of that equipment, which helps resolve an outage faster. As with any technology today, we must also integrate different systems, support and upgrade equipment, and stay on top of cyber threats. We maintain a full warehouse of items necessary for our repairs and replacements. And back at our home base on Aurora Avenue, our engineering team explores new designs and how to meet the needs of our residential and commercial customers. It takes 103 in-house employees to do what I just described, but there is much more that goes into operating the utility. We must stay on top of national and state decisions impacting the industry as a whole. We must also monitor reporting requirements and calculate what we owe to organizations whose equipment transmits our power. These are highly specialized tasks. Our power provider, IMEA, handles all of this in addition to securing enough energy and capacity for the city. They began handling these items in 2007 before we obtained our power from them. IMEA regularly interfaces with our Regional Transmission Organization, or RTO, which I briefly touched on back in March. Our RTO is like the air traffic controller of the power grid, and IMEA works with them on our behalf. Closer to home, IMEA also designs and administers several energy efficiency grant programs and a demand response program our commercial customers can apply for. Without a contractor handling these larger financial, legislative, and legal issues, we would be unable to pursue them internally without more resources. And finally, we must plan. None of us has a crystal ball to know what will happen with every variable involved in running a utility. So we must balance all of the factors, both those within our control and those with more external influences, to make the best decisions at a moment in time. What are those items we have more control over? Last month, I mentioned that we have begun an aggressive asset inspection program, which will allow us to develop a comprehensive system condition report. This report will allow us to identify problematic or aging equipment and appropriately budget for and prioritize replacement as material becomes available. We can also look at data to show us trends, like our downward trend in overall electric use. We can then use that data in our rate study to get a more accurate outcome. We can also plan based on our knowledge of the market. Since the pandemic, lead times for critical equipment and costs have increased exponentially. Now we must be prepared to purchase something up to 3 years before it is needed because it will take that long to receive. Finally, because of the power industry's level of complexity, pivoting from one operational model to another isn't something that can happen in a matter of weeks or even a year. Implementing any significant changes would take multiple years, which is why larger contracts, like how we will procure energy and related services, begin discussions far earlier than may seem necessary. On the opposite side, some factors can impact our utility's operation, yet they are not easily planned for. We are living in a time of unprecedented technological advancement. Instead of decades, introducing a life-changing product can take months. That means we have to account for the technologies already here, like electric vehicles or solar panels, and recognize that currently unknown items could rapidly impact power needs. We also know what happens in Springfield and Washington impacts Naperville, like with the 2021 state CEJA legislation. As elections take place and the makeup of legislative bodies change, new mandates could be placed on the industry as a whole. And finally, we have what people place value on. We know that in general, people are more eco-conscious today than a few decades ago. That value impacts how people use energy, as you saw in March when we reviewed our downward sloping powered consumption. How customer values shift can certainly impact our operations, but we cannot say with certainty what will happen in the next few decades. As the Board of Directors, your decisions around rates, budget, and our power needs are complex. They take all of what I just talked about into account. When staff looks at this, we see the need for balance in decision-making. This means that looking for stability and reliability using those more defined factors while remaining flexible to respond to actual conditions as they develop. It's these last two ideas, how energy usage has changed and what factors can impact decision-making, that will guide our last two presentations. Next month, we'll look at how the energy efficiency conversation has shifted in the past decades. And this summer, we'll tie everything together and look at how defining priorities now can help frame future decisions. Thank you for your time this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, before I call on Councilman White, just a reminder to the audience, I understand a lot of this stuff that's being discussed is not of interest to you. Please be respectful of our speaker and the questions that are going to be going back and forth from the dais. If you have conversations that need to take place, please step outside and you can have them out there. Councilman White.
Thank you, Mayor. Great presentation, by the way. There was some discussion earlier from some of the speakers as far as potentially bidding out the next contract and so on. I said, okay, it makes a lot of sense. But I don't know if you could look into a crystal ball, and this may be something you might want to look into and share with us at a later date. But I'm curious what that would look like. What would you mentioned a lot of good stuff here as far as how many years it would take to do certain things. Could you potentially timeline this out to say if you're going to bid this out, it needs to happen by such and such time because we're going to need to have these particular things in place in order for us to transition to another company. And I'm not advocating that we're going to do one way or the other, but I know a lot of discussion has taken place with it, and I would be curious what that looks like, so we, as a council, know when we need to start making some moves here.
Certainly, we could take a look at that. That sounds very close to what we're looking for also in the RFP that was released for services, where we're looking for a consultant to identify all the options that the city has, timelines, risks, benefits, all of that is what we would expect to come back from a consultant in this space too.
Okay. How long do you think it'd take you to get something to us?
We're currently speaking with the vendor right now, so I would expect that we were looking at the end of summer timeline to come back with their findings.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilwoman Longenbow.
Thank you, Mayor. I kind of wanted to jump on what you just said, Councilman White. You mentioned that, things in the past took decades and now they only take, a few months. So wouldn't that be an argument for not jumping in to renew the contract like right now? Because we don't necessarily need to, because we don't need decades to figure out what is going on. That it just seems to me that we wouldn't need to be renewing it like in the next year when we have so much time.
I think where we're looking at a longer roadmap is if we were to select a different option, right? And so if we are out for bid on all of our options, right? In a document or a presentation that will provide all of our options to council. Some of those options may take a very long time, and some of those options may be very quick. And that's where we need to start looking at all of our options and then decide and solidify on an option so that we have a long enough lead time to implement any option.
Okay, so you're talking more about just the contract wherever it may be in general, that's where we need the lead time, not necessarily in new technology that is, could be out there.
That's correct. As I noted in some of that presentation, some options could take a very long time to implement. Hiring staff and building up the ability to do these functions in-house will take a long time.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilman McBroom.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Groth. Great presentation and elaborating on the RFP. Councilman White's question, and we had a speaker tonight. There's been an impression that we aren't going to market, and you did answer it in your presentation, and so I appreciate you elaborating on that. We are looking at other options, so that's important. The other thing that I hear from our constituents is there's a risk to an early contract acceptance, that we give up bargaining leverage there. If you could just comment on that, because I kind of hear it over and over. Is there a flip side to that, or is there another way to look at that? I'm not suggesting we rush into any contract, but is that accurate, or is there a different way to look at early contract acceptance? Is there benefits to doing that?
So much like we're trying to figure out what the best path forward is for the city, IMEA is also trying to determine what the path forward is for their members. And, who's in and who is out makes a big difference in how they procure energy as well as how they plan for the future as well. So we're trying to plan as well as IMEA is trying to plan, and that's the reason why they're asking for commitment, in the next year or so, related to who will be around and who will not be around.
So would it be accurate, that you could possibly get better pricing by accepting a contract earlier? Is that what they're enticing us or they would like to do?
Yes, when the city signed a contract and joined IMEA after the others had joined, there was a premium service charge to account for the equity that the other owners had put into the agency and the agency's resources.
Councilwoman Taylor.
Thank you. So with our contract with IMEA, we have it in the contract that we have to tell them 5 years before the expiration, so in 2030, whether we're going to renew or not. So why, and that's something that they put in. So why is it a change now? I mean, I understand they need to have notice and plan. Mm-hmm. Why were they unable to come up with an accurate number during the original contract negotiation for how long they need to plan for the future? Well, now they're requiring 10 years notice versus the 5 years they originally negotiated for. I mean, that's what I meant. It's a huge, I mean, it's double the amount of time. And I guess that's the problem, or the issue that I'm grappling with, is why they need double the amount of time that they negotiated in a contract. Thank you.
Director?
Absolutely. I think that the industry is changing, as well as the life of their assets are being affected by state law, and now they've, as a board, we've passed the sustainability plan, which outlines a transition to carbon neutral, zero carbon resources in 2050. So I think as we approach the 2035 and 2030 dates, they want to understand who's in and who's out, to understand what resources they will need to procure and how they'll need to replace the resources that are retiring.
Okay, Councilman Wilson.
Just from my experience with tech and markets, the closer you get to something, the more volatile it would be. Similarly, if you had a longer term contract, you would have more like lower vol, really. Would you say that's similar to this? Like, just again, for a financial example, the closer you get to I don't know how else to describe this. An options expiration, it moves around more. So similarly, like a contract with an energy market, would you think that that would be similar?
It's hard to obviously predict the future, and hard to predict energy markets, into the future. But when the city joined IMEA in 2007, they were facing incredibly volatile energy markets. Since the city has joined IMEA and been a part of IMEA, energy prices have been stable. That is only part of the electric utilities rates, and we'll be talking a little bit about how all of this fits together when we go through the rate study later this summer. But in general, the city entered into the IMEA long-term contract for stable rates, and stable rates have been provided by IMEA. When the city was involved with JR and Goldman Sachs, between 2007 and 2010, rates were a little bit less stable. And there were rate increases that went along with that. And there are pros and cons to moving forward with shorter-term contracts as well as longer-term contracts. And that shakes out in what obviously the residents pay and the commercial customers pay.
Do you happen to know, even if we had moved, wait to sign any sort of contract, and even do shorter term contracts, does that necessarily mean that we would be able to get something more energy efficient?
If you're asking about renewables?
Yes.
Yes. So the IPA has recently closed 2 auctions, and their energy makeup for those auctions is similar to IMEA's mix. And that's just where the market is. And we have to look at, from an energy perspective, what is delivered to customers is essentially a PJM mix, which is what is put into the market in real time. And then what is purchased as base load is a longer term, and generally those are more thermal assets.
So potentially we could get something with higher volatility and the same thing.
That's potential, yes.
Thank you.
Director, between all of the moving parts here, the RFPs, the rate studies, all these different negotiations that you've been having behind the scenes to get us as much information as we possibly can, what is the time frame for when you think something might come to the council for any sort of potential consideration?
We expect to continue these presentations through May, likely taking a break for a few months while we analyze the consultant's response. And then we would not expect to bring anything related to an IMEA contract to council before Q4 of this year.
So there would be no votes by this council until Q4 at the earliest, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. The other question I have is, at present, my understanding is we have an opt-in on our utility bill for renewable energy, right? We can choose to pay a little bit more and have renewable energy instead of just regular electrons, right?
That's
Can you explain how that process works and what the participation rate is right now to give us an indication of where our community stands on this issue?
Certainly. There's a little bit over 3,500, about 3,700 customers that participate in the renewable energy program. And that's a completely voluntary program where the customer will, voluntarily provide $5. The finance department will collect that. We maintain the renewable energy fund separate from the electric utility fund. And we use those funds to fund grants for solar installations, for energy efficiency programs, really anything along the lines of, the watt not consumed is the greenest watt.
And on a percentage basis of our total customer base, that means about 5%?
Yeah, I believe that's about 5%. We're about 65,000 customers.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Councilman Wilson.
Got a follow-up question on that. Can you talk about the history of the rebate program in terms of where it used to be and where it's at now?
So the Renewable Energy Fund program was initially created to procure RECs on behalf of the residents and the businesses within the city of Naperville. Since that program has shifted to become the renewable energy program I just described for the mayor. And so the program no longer procures RECs. It simply helps to fund renewable energy programs within the city to reduce energy consumption.
Thanks. And so if somebody paid $5 a month previously, what type of grant could they get for solar panels, for example?
So we made changes in December of this year to the rebate amounts, but in general, about $2,000 for a large size array, up to a 10 kW array, is what's available, and all the programs are available on the city's electric utility website. I will note that we are about 70% committed with the dollars that are available this year. So if there are folks that want to get grant applications in, I would advise that they get them in sooner than later, because that program is likely to run out of money in the May or June timeframe.
Was the rebate program previously higher?
The dollar amounts that were allocated were higher in previous years, and that was because for a long time we were not able to fulfill all the grant. There were not enough grant requests to consume all of the money that was budgeted, right? And now we are seeing a significant uptake in grant applications.
Thank you.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick follow-up points on that renewable energy program, because it's been a focal point for at least 5 years, 6 years or more. One, if you can just describe with some specificity how residents can sign up for that, because that's always been a challenge to let people know it exists, and how do they actually physically sign up for that program?
There are forms, electronic forms. We've moved the program to completely electronic means. It is on the City of Naperville's website.
Thank
And
you.
so if you just look at the electric utility, you could see all of the programs, not only the Naperville program, but also the IMEA program, which is focused on thermostats, as well as commercial programs.
And in terms of the historical use of it, when we were purchasing RECs, I think that the balance in that account was much higher, like $1 million is my recollection, and now it's much closer to almost zero. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. So I believe the peak was about $1.4 or $1.5 million fund balance, because we were purchasing a set amount of RECs and collecting more than we were spending on the RECs. Council passed a couple of resolutions that would change the budget and directed staff to spend down that budget. So now, and perhaps Ray could elaborate a little bit more on that, but what we have is now, 2023 revenues are 2024 expenses, so that we can match those exactly and try and keep a zero balance in that. So everything received is expensed.
And then last question, just for clarification for the public, I think you can choose the dollar amount you pay in every month. Is that right? It could be $5 or it could be $20. It's up to the person, but you do have to contribute some amount of money for a certain number of months to be eligible for the grants. So can you confirm that's correct, and how long that time period is?
It is now 5 years that you have to be a member. So you'll get the grant money, but you have to pledge to be a member of the program. Yes, and you can elect to use any dollar amount you'd like, over $5.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Groth. At this time, we will take a 10-minute recess. We will be back at 9:07 for